I was at supper this evening with a group of people who are passionate about protecting our access to natural health products. And it dawned on me that I need to ask you a question when I begin this evening. And I need you to think about this question very carefully. And I need you to think about the question I'm going to ask you because you have been conditioned to answer the question yes. As soon as I ask you the question, the answer yes is going to pop into your head. Of course, absolutely. And you need to understand you've been conditioned to answer this question yes, because if you weren't conditioned, if the answer wasn't yes, our state would collapse. So it's a question that we can tolerate some individuals answering no. We can tolerate the odd disgruntled group saying no, providing they're small enough. But in our collective consciousness, the answer to this question has to be yes, or the state runs into a problem. And so I'm going to ask you the question. You're going to say yes before you even think about it. Later on, when we talk about this conditioning, I'm going to ask you the question again, but ask you to go, okay, just ignore your head and kind of move down into your gut, because we get a gut feeling about things that tells us really what's going on. And I'll ask you the question a second time after I've done that. And the question simply is, are you free? Are you free? You know that the default answer is, yes, we're conditioned to say yes. We live in Canada. This is a free, democratic society. The United Nations tells us this is potentially the freest place on earth. Sometimes we're ranked number one. Denmark sometimes gets number one. We kind of alternate with that. But we've been conditioned to believe that we are free. I mean, it's curious about conditioning. I grew up during the Cold War. And as I was growing up, I was being conditioned to fight the Soviet Union. I actually had anxiety, and I know some of my classmates had anxiety that we would be fighting a war. And I was taught to hate the Soviet Union. I was taught to hate them because they weren't free. I mean, think about this. The communist state had seized all of the real estate. You couldn't own real estate. And contrast that with Canada. We so cherish our right to own real estate that if the police come onto your property uninvited and you go to court, all you have to prove is that they were there. You don't have to prove that you suffered any loss, that it upset you or anything. We have so entrenched in our legal system this protection of our fundamental right to enjoyment of private property that a court will order the police to pay you damages just on you proving they were there uninvited. They didn't have anything like that in the Soviet Union. They didn't have this law of trespass. I mean, even their personal property, cars and furniture and clothes, they didn't have the same protection against the state that we had. This is what we're taught. I mean, in Canada, we were taught the state cannot seize your property without going to an independent court and getting a warrant, getting permission by this court that runs interference between the police and us. So, I mean, it was night and day. We were free, they weren't free, and I was being conditioned. Now, it's curious, I'm setting you up because Bill C-51 we're going to talk about abolishes the law of trespass, allows the police to seize our property without a warrant, allows them to do that without an independent court. And we're allowing that. But back to my little analogy about our conditioning, it very well may be that we are correct in our thinking that we are freer than the Soviet Union. But I need you to appreciate that they were also taught that we weren't free and that they were. I mean, they would have fought a war to liberate us from the capitalist oppressors who were using our sweat and our blood for their private property. That's what they were taught. And if they were asked the question, are you free? They would have been conditioned to answer it yes. And we'd look and say, well, yes, but that was communist propaganda, and miss the point that they were probably more aware that they were being conditioned than we are. We are being conditioned. You have been conditioned. And even if they realized they were a little less free than us, they would have been willing to trade that freedom because the state would be telling them it's necessary for security. Okay? Because we will trade our freedom for security. It's a trend. Societies all through history, governments can convince the citizens to give up freedom for security. We've witnessed south of the border in George Bush's time, the United States citizens giving up tremendous privacy rights, all in the name of security. I mean, we've witnessed this. We're all aware of this. It's just an example of how we give up our freedom to be safe, to be secure. I could come up with, some examples we'd all agree with. Well, yes, I'm glad we traded these freedoms. I mean, when I started driving, I didn't have to wear seatbelts. But we've traded the freedom to choose whether we will or not wear seatbelts because the state has told us it's not safe. I didn't have to wear a motorcycle helmet when I started riding a motorcycle. I mean, up until a couple of months ago, I could gas up my car without prepaying, which, may not be a pain for you in Vancouver, but I live in the interior, and I travel quite a bit, and most of the gas stations don't have pay at the pump. And the full-serve ones, I can lose half an hour waiting now because I'm not free. And you might say, well, yeah, no, I agree with that. And I'm trying to give you examples that you agree with, but just to drive home the point, you cannot drive without a seatbelt. The state will punish you. You're not free to do it. You can't drive a motorcycle without a helmet. You're not free. You will be punished. You cannot gas up your car without prepaying. You're not free. We trade, and all of these, it's justified for safety, whether ours or somebody else in society. If we were all to come back here in 10 years, we could put a blackboard up behind me. We could write out those freedoms that we've lost in that 10 years. Because 10 years from now, people will have been hurt by something, there would have been safety concerns arise, and we will voluntarily give our freedoms up in the name of safety. It's just something that we do. I think that we've been conditioned to, just almost knee-jerk, we will give up our freedom for safety. And I think we've been conditioned to do that because we so readily do it. There's a clear pattern. I mean, where's the last time a safety issue was raised where people said, no, we're not willing to give up our freedom for safety? I mean, you listen to the radio talk shows, anyone's hurt on anything, and it's like the government needs to intervene. They need to make this illegal. You don't hear people saying, well, actually, it's good that this was brought to our attention so that we can individually take responsibility to be more careful. You don't hear that. So we're a society where we really want Big Brother to take care of us. And I promise you, Big Brother is going to take care of you. So what aspect of your life isn't regulated? I mean, think about it. What part of your life right now isn't regulated? So when I ask you, are you free? And we just ignore what your head says and kind of move down to your gut, and you're thinking about, well, just wait a second, what can I do in my life without the government putting limits on it? Are you really free? It's a good question. Now, another question is, are you free to choose how you are going to deal with sickness in your own body? Because we're all going to get sick. We're all going to face major health challenges. Are you free to choose how you are going to address sickness in your own body? Do you actually have sovereignty over your own body to choose how you're going to deal with that sickness? And let me just put it in perspective. We are now being conditioned by the state to expect a major flu pandemic. And when I say we're being conditioned, if I would have said 5 years ago, if we were all in this room and I said avian flu, none of you would know what I'm talking about. Avian flu? What? What's that? What's he talking about? But I say avian flu now, and every single one here knows exactly what I'm talking about. Because we've all heard in the media how a virus might mutate from birds and get into humans and become such that it can be transmitted from human to human and go across the globe and kill up to 20% of us. We all know the words avian flu. We're being conditioned to accept a flu pandemic. Now, I hope you can appreciate that historically, roughly every 60 years, there is a major flu pandemic that takes out about 1 out of every 5. The last one was 1918. We are long overdue for a flu pandemic. And for those of us, because we've been conditioned to think the men in white coats, the doctors with their stethoscopes around their neck are going to save us, I hope you can appreciate that there's nothing our medical system can do. It's going to be a virus. Antibiotics don't take care of virus. So our penicillin and all our exotic antibiotics, they're useless. It'll be sweeping the globe because they won't have a vaccine. It will be killing 1 in 5 of us and disrupting society because they're not going to be able to do anything. The allopathic medical system is not going to be able to stop a flu pandemic. What can they do? Now, when I say allopathic medical system, for those of you who don't know what allopathic means, it's the word that describes our mainstream doctors and hospitals. And our mainstream doctors and hospitals are allopathic. The philosophy is, in the allopathic system, well, you don't keep people healthy, you don't address the cause of illness, but you treat symptoms as they arise. So allopathic medicine is the treatment of symptoms, not the curing of sickness, not the preventing of sickness, but our system is geared towards treating symptoms. And how it's evolved historically is it is dominated by the pharmaceutical companies. So when you access the allopathic system, you are prescribed chemical pharmaceutical drugs to treat your symptoms. That's the model we have. So when I refer to allopathic, I want everyone to understand what I'm talking about. Now, in 1918, when the flu epidemic swept through North America, there were homeopathic hospitals and there were allopathic hospitals. And if you went to an allopathic hospital, you got the flu in 1918, and you went to an allopathic hospital, you had roughly an 80% chance of dying. I mean, you were almost certainly dead if you went to an allopathic hospital. Now, I hope you can appreciate that nothing's changed, because when you go to an allopathic hospital, if the government's right and this pandemic comes, really they're going to have about an 80% death rate, because they can't do anything. They have no defense against virus. Now, back in 1918, when they still had homeopathic hospitals, the statistics were a little different. If you had the flu and you went to a homeopathic hospital, you had about an 80% chance of living. Now, let's take a vote. If you had a choice in 1918, which hospital would you go to? Well, the question, though, is today we don't have homeopathic hospitals. And so if this flu pandemic breaks out and you get the flu, do you understand that your government has taken away a freedom that you had in 1918? In 1918, you had the freedom to choose. Do you go to an allopathic hospital and die, or do you go to a homeopathic hospital and live? You actually had that choice. But the allopathic doctors and their pharmaceutical firm backers have convinced the government to outlaw homeopathic hospitals and marginalize the alternative health community. And do you know what the justification was for us giving up that freedom? Safety. Well, think of it, safety. Because the doctors and the white coats, they have science behind them. And, the homeopathic doctors, they didn't have the same lobbying capabilities, and so they were branded as quacks, as not safe. I mean, it's all in the name safety. That's how this is done. But I'm just trying to give you some context. When I'm asking you the question, are you free to choose how you are going to treat your own body when you're sick, that you need to appreciate you've already lost freedoms historically that you had. I mean, we're being conditioned for something, and the last time we had a track record to look, 1918, we had a choice. We don't have that choice. Now, most of us here, when I say, well, are you free to choose? how you're going to treat yourself when you're sick, we would go, well, yeah, we do. We can choose the alternative health field. As small and debilitated as it is, we can make that choice. But many of us, because most of us in this room will be middle class, but those of us that are on welfare or the working poor that don't have spare cash, they are not free to choose to use the alternative health field because the state will pay for them to go to an allopathic doctor, to an allopathic hospital. The state will pay for their chemical pharmaceutical drugs. The state will not pay for them to go to a naturopathic doctor, a homeopathic doctor, or purchase natural health products. Why? Because our state is deliberately not giving the disadvantaged in our society the freedom to choose. So those of us that are middle class or upper class in this room, understand that you only have a choice because of your social position. That our government has a social policy that denies the lower parts of our society any choice at all. Now, even a more fundamental question as to, well, are you free? Are you free to decide how to treat yourself when you're sick? Should you be free? I mean, this is a fundamental question. Should you be free when you get sick to decide how you're going to deal with your illness? Whether the state agrees with you or disagrees, should you have that right? When your children get sick, should you have the right to decide how to address that illness? The government is in the process of answering that question for you. And you really need to pay attention because you might not like how they're answering that question. Okay, am I clear here? The government is answering that question for you, and you need to pay attention because you may not like how they're answering the question. Because there is currently a move to restrict your freedom. And it's not just a move to restrict your freedom in how you choose to treat illness. There's a broader movement to restrict your freedom. And I have to credit Peter Helgason, my associate at the Natural Health Product Association, is he said to me, we're actually having a shift at the fundamental level of how we approach freedom in Canada. Because historically, we have approached freedom from the perspective that we are absolutely free as citizens, and the only limitations on our freedom is where the state, specifically lists out some limitations. He said, both the U.S. and Canada, they were populated by people who were fleeing persecution of one type or another and were thirsty for freedom. Whether they were, needing religious freedom, whether they were escaping from an oppressive state, whether they were escaping poverty and wanted this chance to homestead in this, brave new land. And we, by default, because Britain was the colonial power, we got the British common law system. It goes back to the Magna Carta, where the basis was you are free, and the king can't do whatever he wants. He's limited to, set little things. And so our default position was we are free to do whatever we want, except we collectively get together in Parliament or the legislature, and we outline areas where we're not free. That's been our basis point. That's been our starting point. It's not like that in all other countries. So, for example, if we look at Europe where they have civil law countries, the basis isn't that you're free. Rather, the government has, control. This is at the philosophical, fundamental level. The government's the big brother and outlines what you can do. It's much more limited. So in the area of natural health products, let's use Germany as an example. They put together a Commission E, and Commission E list. They made a list of natural health product substances that are legal to sell. And everything else is illegal. The presumption is it's illegal unless you're on this specified list, unless we've given you the right, unless the state has given you the freedom. If we look at the United States, how their dietary supplements are regulated, they are presumed to be safe. So there's a presumption that you can sell them, and the FDA actually has to have evidence of harm to restrict them. Okay, you see the difference? There's a fundamental difference here. And what Mr. Helgason was pointing out to me is it's not just in the area of health freedom, but it's in other areas The government is actually asking us to move our fundamental position more to this European civil law model. I was at a Bill C-51 forum a couple of weeks ago, and somebody asked a question that was answered by a Health Canada person, and the question was on codex. And the Health Canada person almost got angry and said, look we need to make a choice. Do we want to have international trade, or do we want to limit ourselves? And he was almost spitting, and have North American trade as if that was a dirty thing. Of course we want international trade. Well, I don't want to unify with the European Union where you have to go to your doctor to get a prescription for vitamin C and get it dispensed by a pharmacy, and it costs you, 50 or $100, and it's pharmaceutical grade instead of natural source. I don't want that. I'd rather not have international trade. I like actually having the freedom to choose to access natural health products. But you have to understand, at a fundamental level, we're being asked to do a shift, and the justification is safety. You are being asked to permit regulations that are damaging the industry and taking away your freedom of choice, and the justification is safety. You're being told, well, we need to make sure natural health products are safe. And you need to understand, and I'll get into this in more detail later, that justification is wrong. In fact, we have it backwards. We're presuming natural health products are unsafe, when the truth is, it's the position we're taking that's unsafe. It's driving them off the market that's unsafe. And we're at a crisis point where if we don't get people to kind of wake up and get involved and appreciate that their freedom to choose is being taken away, that we're going to go to the German model and we're not going to be able to return. Now, my first involvement was acting on behalf of Health Canada against a herbalist named Jim Strauss, who was suing Health Canada. Health Canada had seized some of his herbs. He was suing Health Canada for compensation. I got the file, I acted for Health Canada, and I had his matter thrown out of court. And I was happy to do so because, no, don't clap about that, please. I was happy to do so because, I was acting for Health Canada. I was hurting this herbalist. But in my mind, natural health products, it was snake oil. It was a fraud on people. How could we possibly allow charlatan manufacturers to sell products that do not comply 100% with the act and regulations that are there to protect us? Could you imagine us permitting that? How dare us? So, but I had to do a conversion because by some twist of fate, that very same herbalist got charged with practicing medicine, and he came to me and he said, well, will you defend me? Well, yeah, I guess. And under the provincial legislation, so there's an act in BC that gives the doctors their medical monopoly, and it basically says unless you're a doctor, you can't claim to be helping people therapeutically. And he was claiming to cure heart disease. He wasn't shy about it. He was claiming to cure heart disease. So I couldn't defend him by saying he wasn't making the claim. So what I did is I decided to challenge the legislation itself, because the legislation said he can't make the claim. And our Charter of Rights and Freedoms says we have an absolute right to freedom of expression. It's a constitutional right. So I was asking the court to strike down the legislation for violating our right to freedom of expression. It helps me to convince a judge to strike down legislation that's almost 100 years old for violating freedom of expression if the judge thinks my client's telling the truth. And so I asked this guy, is there any way we can show that you're telling the truth? And I didn't believe it at the time, just so you're clear. And he's got this little mom and pop herb shop. You're more likely to have a cup of tea with him than buy anything. It was really just a small little shop. There's no double-blind clinical trial here, I know. And so I asked him, but, is there anything we can do? And he gave me boxes of letters that people had voluntarily just written to him. And they just said, I had severe heart disease, I was dying, I couldn't work, I was bedridden. I started taking your heart drops, I got well, I've gone back to work, I'm running again. thank you, thank you, thank you, God bless you, thank you. Like every letter was the same, just different names and addresses and phone numbers. Now, I can't enter those letters as evidence. That's called hearsay. But I can call those people to take the stand, swear to tell the truth, and be tested with cross-examination. And in fact, that's more important to a court than a double-blind clinical trial. They want to see the whites of people's eyes, and they want to rely on people that are telling the truth. That's the best type of evidence in court. I mean, it's not for a regulator. It doesn't matter what you say. I had shifted through those letters. I interviewed tons of people. I settled on 5 middle-class professional witnesses who had all had severe heart disease. They had all had at least one bypass surgery. Some had had more than one. They had all continued to have heart disease because the allopathic model was not addressing the cause of their sickness, and so the arteries plugged up again. They had all needed another bypass surgery, and here's where they differed. Some of them, the medical system wasn't willing to put them through that again because they were not good candidates to survive. And some of them were not willing to go through it again because it was just such an awful experience, they would have rather died. Now, in going through that process, I mean, literally I had my road to Damascus conversion. I came to realize that I had it absolutely backwards. That these heart drops from the very same herbalist who I had thrown out of court a couple of years before, that wasn't snake oil. That was helping thousands of Canadians back to health, and many had saved their lives. And so the danger wasn't in allowing these heart drops, which were not in 100% compliance with the law, on the market. The danger was even suggesting that you would try to take something that was helping thousands of people for a serious, life-threatening illness off of the market. I mean, that's just absurd. And you need to know that Health Canada, after doing a health hazard assessment and coming to the conclusion that there was absolutely no risk caused by these heart drops, went after that company to try and drive those heart drops off the market, which is just, it blows my mind. And Health Canada would tell you, well, we're actually doing that for your safety. And Health Canada is justifying their enforcement actions, their regulations that are destroying our industry, and Bill C-51, they're justifying that for safety. But now, I'm couching this as, well, you know, this is a freedom of choice issue. But Health Canada's telling us they want to protect our freedom of choice. They're telling us that. I've seen their responses to people's letters on Bill C-51, and I've seen their talking points, and they're saying, no, we are protecting your access to natural health products. They're saying that. And I need you to understand that if you want to understand what a regulatory body's ultimate goal is, you have to ignore what they say and look at what they do. And you can apply this to people too. I mean, think about it. If you want to know what somebody's end goal is, well, they can lie to you. They can say anything they want to make you feel good. But if you look at their pattern of behavior over time, it's going to point you to where they're going. And so Health Canada really does tell us that they want to protect our access to natural health products. In fact, some of them get angry when you suggest that there's a problem with even the current failure rate of natural health product licenses. I want to read to you the mission statement for the Natural Health Product Directorate just because it's so wonderful. It sounds great. So listen to this. Our role is to ensure that Canadians have ready access to natural health products that are safe, effective, and of high quality, while respecting freedom of choice and philosophical and cultural diversity. You know, that just makes you feel warm inside. You feel like you're in front of the fire with some hot chocolate in your hand, and everything's good. Okay, so that's the talk. But let's look at what they do, okay? Because you have to learn to just ignore what they say and look what they do. I mean, many in this room are aware. Health Canada used to have a lab that had expertise in analyzing natural health products. They kind of had a unit. And around 1990, they disbanded it. They just decided it wasn't worth spending the money because the industry as a whole had such a low risk. Why would we bother to fund this lab? It doesn't matter that it was, a world-class facility. And then, not less than 5 years later, they changed their mind, and they come out of the gate and they just start persecuting this industry with a vengeance, driving products off the market. You rebelled. The consumer rebelled. There were petitions, there were rallies, there were protests. The pressure was enormous. I'm told by a parliamentary aide that you signed the petition that basically said, do not treat natural health products as drugs. To protect our access to natural health products, more of you signed that than any other petition in Canadian history. I mean, isn't that something? You forced Alan Rock, the Minister of Health, to back up and say, oh, okay, I'm listening to you, I hear you, we're obviously doing something wrong. And he asks the Standing Committee of Health, look into this. Look into how we should be regulating natural health products because Canadians are mad at what we're doing. And I'm told, again, that the Standing Committee of Health, which is a committee in Parliament made up by members from all of the parties, that their consultative process was by and large, the largest one in Canadian history. I mean, they held hearings, they had scores of people come and explain to them how they should manage natural health products. And the government said, we accept, the Standing Committee of Health came out with 53 recommendations. And we thought we'd won. We thought we were going to get a third category. We thought they were going to be treated as drugs and presumed dangerous. We thought that we were going to get, standards that we could live with that didn't drive most of us off of the market. And so the Minister of Health, Alan Rock, says after he said, well, we're adopting these 53 recommendations, he says to Health Canada, the bureaucracy whose behavior we're looking at, take these 53 recommendations and implement them. And Health Canada does its own little consultations and comes up with regulations, and out come the natural health product regulations. You can take those regulations, and instead of where it says natural health product, just write in drug, and compare them with the drug regulations. The structure, the form, the presumptions of danger are the same. We are still a drug under the Act. We're not a third category. We are presumed to be dangerous. We have to prove that we're safe. Now, so instead of like in the United States where they're presumed safe, where the default position is freedom, except where the government says you can't do something, every natural health product in Canada is presumed to be dangerous until the manufacturer can get through the licensing process. For now, for a product to be legal, it has to have a product license. And so if you walked into any health food store, we could just go down the street, walk into the health food store, and we see products all around us on shelves. Almost all of those do not have licenses. And Health Canada is allowing them to stay on the shelves for now because the manufacturers have submitted applications for licenses, but thank goodness Health Canada hasn't been able to get through them. And I say thank goodness because of those applications they have gotten through. I mean, we've had roughly a 55% failure rate. Okay, so over half have failed. And a lot of these applications that have failed have been single ingredient applications because Health Canada has made a decision to try and focus on the easy applications first. I hope you can appreciate people like myself are expecting that the percentage is going to get higher when Health Canada gets to the tougher applications, the multi-ingredient applications. So when you walk into the health food store and you look at all the products around you, you need to understand that we're in the process of the majority of those products being declared illegal. And once they're declared illegal, they have to be removed from the shelves. Now, at the same time, so this is where we're at right now. We're in the process of these products being declared illegal, the majority of them. Health Canada is also going from university to university hiring enforcement officers. They're recruiting. They're recruiting from the science grads, enforcement officers. So they're anticipating a need for more enforcement at a time when the natural health product industry is in the process of, by and large, being declared illegal. And then along comes Bill C-51, which will give these enforcement officers unprecedented power to destroy companies that make these products, to destroy retailers, and to drive the products off the market. We are literally facing the biggest threat that we've seen in my lifetime to this industry. So your freedom of choice. I want to give you an example of a company to make 2 points. First of all, the point that it is dangerous to remove natural health products from the market. And the second point that I want to make is just to drive home to you that you do not have a freedom to choose. I mean, Health Canada, they've got it in their mind we need to have 100% compliance with this law and these regulations. And if you're not in 100% compliance, it doesn't matter what Canadians are telling us. We don't care. And the company I want to talk about is True Hope Nutritional Support. Some of you will be aware of them and some of you won't. But they make a product called eMpower Plus that treats bipolar disorder. And they're an unusual company in a couple of respects. One of the respects they're unusual is that they have tried to go out of their way to interest universities in conducting research into the use of nutrition for the treatment of mental illness. So they managed to get a researcher at the University of Lethbridge to do a little case study on that. They managed to get the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Calgary to run 2 case series using eMpower Plus, one on children, one on adults. And both of these case series showed that roughly 8 out of 10 people with bipolar that start taking eMpower Plus get well. I mean, either completely well or so close to completely well that it's amazing, which is just a staggering percentage. And these studies ran on average about 8 weeks, and during that period of time, there was roughly a 50% use in the antipsychotic drugs. The Faculty of Medicine at the University of Calgary gets so excited about these results that they go to the Alberta Government Science Foundation and say, we've never seen anything like this. You need to take taxpayer money and publicly fund a double-blind clinical trial into this. It's amazing. So the Alberta government looks at it, they agree, they cough up taxpayer money to run a government-funded double-blind clinical trial. It's run by the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Calgary. It's conducted by psychiatrists out of Children's Hospital. It's run on adults, but their research unit is based in Children's Hospital. And halfway through the study, Health Canada decides they want to attack True Hope, and they want to attack eMpower Plus, because eMpower Plus did not have what's called a drug identification number. Now, the irony of this is to get a drug identification number, True Hope needed to do a double-blind clinical trial. And Health Canada shut down the double-blind clinical trial. The government-funded double-blind clinical trial. The university fought them for ages, and finally the trial got shut down. It was shut down for about 4 or 5 years. It's now up and running again. And they told True Hope, stop selling eMpower Plus. Now, I told you True Hope was unusual for 2 reasons. One, that they tried to get universities to do research. They were unusual for another reason, and that is that because of the fact that they were dealing with a serious mental illness, they couldn't approach selling their product in the same way as most other natural health products. So you could never buy it in a store. You had to buy it from them. And because they were dealing with people with severe mental illness, they had to manage these people. So they set up a call center, a support center. You could only get eMpower Plus if you agreed that you would be letting them know what your symptoms were each day. They would actually chart your symptoms for a couple of weeks so they knew where you were at before you started taking eMpower Plus. And then they would have professionally trained people work you through the transition to health. Okay? So actually, when Health Canada was attacking them, I mean, they were losing money because this call center cost so much, but just the nature of what they were doing, they had no choice. Now, Health Canada said, you stop selling. You don't have a drug identification number. Now, at the time, this is about the year 2000, the whole industry didn't have drug identification numbers. Like 95% of the 50,000 products on the market didn't have drug identification numbers because you couldn't get them. But True Hope says to Health Canada, we cannot stop selling. We have thousands of Canadians on the product, and if we take the product off the market, people are going to die. They're going to die as they try to transition. Some are going to commit suicide. I mean, we have taken people who have been in and out of psych wards, we've given them their health back, and they won't go back. Now, just so you know that I'm not blowing smoke about what they're saying, because that's a fantastic claim. Health Canada eventually charged True Hope for selling without a drug identification number. And I forced the world expert in treating bipolar disorder to take the stand and testify under oath. I subpoenaed him, so he had to come. This gentleman's name is Dr. Charles Popper. He teaches at Harvard Medical School in Boston. He won't teach mere medical students. He used to teach doctors how to become psychiatrists, but now that's below him. He'll only teach psychiatrists how to become child and adolescent psychiatrists. He basically pioneered the treatment of mental illness in children, the use of drugs to treat mental illness in children. So he pioneered the use of lithium in treating children with depression. He pioneered the use of bipolar drugs on the use of children and created the diagnosis for bipolar in children that's used in the United States. He founded the Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology, which is studying the use of psychodrugs on adolescents and children, and was its editor for about 10 years. He is the only psychiatrist that Boston would allow to have a clinical practice at any of their hospitals, and he got the bipolar patients that the other psychiatrists in the Boston area couldn't handle. So he got the worst of the worst. If you were a psychiatrist, you couldn't handle a bipolar patient in the Boston area, you referred them to Charles Popper, especially if they were a child or adolescent. So I want you to appreciate this guy was Mr. Pharmaceutical, and he's the expert. I don't think there's anyone else in the world that has more expertise than this man in treating people with bipolar. And it would take me about 40 minutes to explain to you how he would even get to the situation where he would allow any of his patients to try E-Empower Plus. Like a vitamin mineral supplement, that was so out of anything he was willing to try. But circumstances conspired against him where one of his patients ended up on E-Empower Plus and got well. And then he just thought, okay, but at least he had an open mind. So there was this one adult lady. It didn't matter what drug cocktails he tried. She just couldn't function. Like, she was just a disaster. And so he put her on E-Empower Plus, and she got well. And then he thought, and he gradually allowed his other patients to try it. And then he said, on the stand under oath, that it destroyed his practice. Okay? Now listen to this, because I said, and I think the transcript of his evidence is posted on the web. It can be found. I asked him, well, what do you mean it destroyed your practice? And he explained to the court, he said, look when I had my patients on the chemical pharmaceutical drugs, I had to meet with every patient once a week. I had to counsel them not to commit suicide because these are severe bipolar patients. They're suicidal. So weekly I had to meet with them, and I had to manage the side effects. I've got them on drug cocktails, and it's destroying their liver, it's destroying their kidneys, it's doing this, it's doing this. I have to keep giving them different drugs and dealing with the side effects. Now listen to this. He puts them in E-Empower Plus, and then he has to meet with them every 3 to 6 months. And he's not counseling them not to commit suicide. It's like, well, how's work going now that you're back at work? How's university now that you're back at university? It's like having coffee with normal people because they were normal people. And he wasn't having to manage side effects. So I asked him, I said, well, Dr. Popper, what would have happened, or what would happen if True Hope took E-Empower Plus off the market? This guy didn't blink, he didn't hesitate. He said there'd be deaths. People would commit suicide. Some of the people on Empower Plus would just make the decision to commit suicide. He said most who didn't commit suicide would end up in psychiatric hospitals because you can't just take them off an effective treatment and just transition them into a drug cocktail again. It takes time. So they'd be hospitalized, and then you would have to go back to managing them the way you did before. He said he would have to give most of his patients away because he took on way more patients after he started using the Empower Plus. So he said, I'd have to give them away because I'd have to go back to meeting with my patients once a week and counseling them not to commit suicide. I would have to start managing the side effects again. Night and day. Now, you need to know this product, the Empower Plus, it's manufactured in the States, and although True Hope and their support center is in Canada, and they take the orders there, it's then shipped across the border. Health Canada was determined to take this product off the market, and so they seized a shipment at the border, and then they started turning shipments away, telling customs to turn shipments away. And so all across Canada, smuggling rings popped up because people weren't willing to go back to the psych wards. Okay, I called some of the participants as witnesses at the trial, and I can't tell you how many that I spoke to said, I had a suicide plan in place because if I ran out, I was not willing to go from being normal again to being back to the psych ward. Some people ran out and they committed suicide. And it was actually the Alberta branch of the Mental Health Association went public. They went to the media blaming Health Canada for the suicides because they were Canadian Mental Health Association members who had committed suicide and made it clear they were committing suicide because they were running out of the Empower Plus and they were not willing to go back to the psych ward. I need you to listen very carefully to what follows here, because Health Canada knew that the Canadian Mental Health Association was blaming them publicly for suicides. Health Canada knew that True Hope was telling them people are committing suicide that are running out. During this trial, Health Canada put a couple of the enforcement officers that were actually involved in turning shipments away at the border on the stand. And I asked them, so I'm going to read to you part of the testimony. So here we've got a lady inspector on the stand. I've just, brought to her attention, okay, you knew that this Mr. Lajeunesse, the head of the Alberta branch of the Canadian Mental Health Association, is going to the media. He's publicly blaming you for suicides. Did you take any steps? I mean, you're turning product away at the border, and he's saying this is causing suicides. And she testified she took no steps, and listen to this, because she did not believe the news of suicides was relevant to the investigation of the prosecutions. Those are her exact words. Later on, when I'm cross-examining her about what True Hope's telling you about suicides, she said there was no evidentiary value into looking into allegations of suicides. The other inspection officer takes the stand, and I question him on these same issues, and he says, look, if he had a document indicating that people were dying, he would ignore it because it's not a policy and it's not a directive. He told us it didn't bother him that his personal enforcement actions could be leading to deaths and hospitalizations because he didn't have personal first-hand knowledge about this. Now, I hope you're listening, because here we have our regulatory body being told by credible third-party sources that their actions are leading to deaths. And they ignored it. Okay, so I was bringing this up because one of my key points is if your life depends on a natural health product, and some of us in this room, our lives actually depend on a natural health product, Health Canada doesn't care. I mean, in the True Hope case, a political science PhD student could do their dissertation on this is actually how you bring an issue to the government's attention. There were protests, there were letter-writing campaigns, there were so many phone calls to Health Canada and the Minister's office that we know from internal emails that the court order disclosed that they couldn't function. So they created what they called a 1-800 crisis line which they promoted to the public. Well, we're taking Empower Plus off the market, so we've created this 1-800 crisis line to help True Hope participants. It sounded like they were doing it to help you, when we know from their internal documents it was just so that they wouldn't have to take your phone calls. So if you phone the Minister's Office or Health Canada, as soon as you said the word Empower Plus or True Hope, they'd hit a button and zing, you're off to this 1-800 crisis line, so they didn't have to deal with you. But it was funny, those crisis line people, they took notes, and it's like 800 pages of people pleading for their lives. And the minister was briefed on that, and Health Canada and the minister ignored it. The participants in the True Hope program did not have the freedom to choose how they were going to treat a life-threatening illness that affected them personally, because our regulatory body says, well, no, we need to have full compliance with the Act and regulations. You need to understand that, many of you in this room, you're actually part of the problem. Because there's a bigger paradigm problem going on here. We are accepting the natural health product regulations. We are accepting natural health products being regulated as drugs with this presumption that they're dangerous. And by accepting that, we're buying into what the government's telling us, well, we need to manage the risk. This is for your safety. Okay? If you're not protesting about this, if you're not letting the government know, no, I don't buy into this, I don't accept this, if you're just sitting still, you are acquiescing to the lie that we need to manage natural health products as drugs for safety. And it's false. I ask a rhetorical question, so I don't need you to answer it, because the answer is none. But often at the lectures I ask, well, okay, how many deaths have been caused in Canadian history by natural health products? And just to give you the perspective, in 2004, when the regulations came out, Health Canada estimated there were 50,000 on the market. Like, we're talking a lot of products. If we went back to our founding date of 1867, there's not a single death that anyone could come up with caused by natural health product. In fact, if you read the Standing Committee of Health report that contains the 53 recommendations, they point out that presenter after presenter after presenter brought to their attention there's never been a death in Canadian history caused by a natural health product. So when the Government of Canada and Health Canada says to you, we need to regulate these as drugs for your safety, you need to understand none of us have ever died from a natural health product. And you have to understand, whenever anyone says to you something's risky, don't just take that at face value. Step back and say, well, okay, but risky compared to what? Like, you have to be able to compare risk to something. You have to have, be able to say, well, relative to what? So, one thing that really amused me from a risk perspective, it's very sad, but I was driving home, I believe it was last summer, I'm listening to the CBC, I'm driving on the highway, and there's a doctor on, and he's complaining that long-distance runners are drinking too much when they run. Because runners, as a group, in their collective running consciousness, it's been drilled into their heads, you have to drink, 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 drink. Keep hydrated. And those of you who are long-distance runners in this room, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You just think, I need to drink, drink, drink. Well, some runners in Canada are overdoing it and dying. So they're drinking too much bottled water when they run. They throw their electrolytes out or whatever, I don't know, and they die. Because their body's under stress, that's the worst time to throw your chemistry out. And what was frustrating this doctor is he searched the medical literature to see if he could find one case of a runner dying from dehydration. And he couldn't find one. So apparently if you're a long-distance runner and you get dehydrated, you have to stop running and you feel really, really sick, but you don't die. And so it was frustrating him that runners were dying by drinking too much bottled water. Now, if we were to take this to any statistician worth their salt and say, okay, from a relative risk perspective, what's more dangerous to Canadians? Bottled water or the 50,000 natural health products on the market? The truth is, bottled water actually presents more of a risk. No, but you see, it's funny because it's sick. It's sick. We're accepting that we need to drive these products off the market for safety because they're unsafe. Those of you who have heard me lecture before, I used the example of peanut butter. Canadians every year die from peanut allergies. And I'm using peanut in a broad sense, for nut allergies. But people actually die from nut allergies. People die every year from shellfish allergies. And many more of us are actually hospitalized, seriously ill from these allergies, but they manage to keep us alive. And so if we, from a relative risk perspective, if we as taxpayers just went to the Canadian government and said, we really want you to save as many lives as you possibly can. So we want you to only focus where you're going to get the most lives saved for our tax dollars. This sounds sick, what I'm going to tell you, but we would be better off taking the money that we've given to Health Canada to regulate these products and creating a national peanut butter directorate. Do you know what I mean? To have them trace those peanuts, from the field to the thing, to have good manufacturing processes, to have recall procedures, for the regulator to be approving their labels, and clinical trials to prove safety and efficacy. If it says creamy smooth, we need scientific evidence that it is creamy and smooth. And you're laughing. You're laughing. But do you understand this is perverted? You're laughing because it just makes no sense that even though peanut butter kills some of us each year, it is a joke. It is a joke to consider regulating peanut butter. It's a joke. But natural health products that are safer and that save lives, is it a joke that we're regulating them as drugs? Like, why aren't you laughing when I say, do you know, we're regulating natural health products as drugs? You're not laughing. Why not? It's sick. Ron Law, who's a professor in New Zealand, who specializes in risk analysis, was asked to use Canadian government statistics to assess the relative risk of natural health products in Canada. And so this professional risk analysis person is able to conclusively tell us that as Canadians, you are more likely to be bitten by a shark than to be harmed, not killed, than to be harmed by a natural health product. Now, some of us are bitten by sharks. I think it's about 3 a year, largely in Australia and Hawaii and stuff like that. So the odd Canadian does get bitten by a shark, but surely to goodness, you're not going to ask the Canadian government to set up a shark directorate. And you're not losing any sleep at night over, oh my gosh, I'm going to be bitten by a shark. You would not give up a single freedom to protect yourself from shark attacks. Okay, listen to this. You will not give up a single freedom to protect yourself against shark attacks, but you will give away your fundamental right to choose how you will be treated when you're sick, how your children will be treated when they're sick, for a lesser risk. Well, a lot of you are, because a lot of you are sitting still, and definitely society as a whole are. And my whole point is risk is relative, and you are being told, the Canadian public is being told, you need to give up your freedom to choose because they're unsafe. And my point is, well, first of all, that's a lie. And then when we look at the risk of removing them from the market, this whole thing becomes sick and perverted. I've told you about the Strauss heart drops. Now, that trial was probably about 10 years ago. But I could have at that time given you the names of thousands of people who would have gotten sick, many of who would have died, if Strauss heart drops were removed from the market. Now, they've been circulated even more widely since. So I can't give you the names and addresses, but the truth is if Strauss heart drops were removed from the market today, there would be tens and thousands of Canadians, many of who would die, all of whom would become terribly sick and languish in their sickness. If EM Power Plus was driven from the market, thousands of Canadians will go back to the psych wards. Many of them will commit suicide because they're not willing to go back. And these are just 2 of the 50,000 products on the market. I'm not just picking 2 effective products. These are just 2 clients of mine. If we were to ask, well, hang on a second, let me just make another point. What is the alternative to taking away our freedom to choose how we are going to treat ourselves? Because I use natural health products because I avoid going to the doctor like the plague. And I avoid taking a pharmaceutical product like the plague. Do you know why? Because when I'm at an international conference in Toronto about 5 years ago, listening to Ron Law, this risk analysis person talk, he's explaining how all of the Western democracies, their statistics-keeping agencies basically hide some of the data from us so that we're not actually aware of what the leading causes of death are. And 2 of the leading causes of death in Canada and the United States are highly preventable hospital incidents, and his key focus here was highly preventable, and also highly preventable deaths caused by pharmaceutical drug adverse reactions. Highly preventable, not ones that were hard to see or anticipate. So one of our 3 leading causes of death are highly preventable pharmaceutical drug reactions. At supper tonight, Tony Stefan said on the flight over, the news was on, and the story was telling us that last year there were 1.7 million hospital admissions in Canada caused by adverse drug reactions. 1.7 million. There's only 30 million of us. So when I tell you that the second leading cause of death is adverse reactions to pharmaceutical drugs, I'm not kidding. Like, can you get your head around that figure? These aren't deaths, these are hospitalizations. 1.7 million. You need to understand that if they take natural health products away, we are forced to the only choice they give us, which is the pharmaceutical drugs, which carry a risk profile that is just outlandish. So not only are we told the lie that they're dangerous, we need to regulate them off the market, but the truth is, and why what we're doing is so absolutely perverse, is taking them off the market is probably one of the most riskiest things we could possibly do as a society, and yet most of the people outside of those doors are happy for the government to be protecting them. So, how many lives, with the natural health product regulations that are there to protect us, and Bill C-51, which is there to enable them to drive these products off the market, how many lives in the next 10 years are going to be saved by these regulations and by Bill C-51? Well, if we just look at the past, we've gone 140 years without a single death. Probably in the next 10 years we wouldn't have a single death. So the answer would be 0. So how many lives, though, will the natural health product regulations in Bill C-51 cause by taking away our freedom to access these products? Is it going to be measured in the hundreds of thousands, or is it going to be measured in the millions? There's no way it's going to be limited to tens and thousands. I mean, this is staggering that people are sitting down and permitting our government to take away our freedom to choose, just like they took away the homeopathic hospitals. It's staggering. So let's talk about Bill C-51, because I've told you that we're in the process of most of the products, or the majority of the products in the health food store shelves being declared illegal. We're in the process of that happening. I've told you that Health Canada is in the process of hiring more enforcement officers, and that Bill C-51 gives them enormous powers. One of the things Bill C-51 does is it enables Health Canada to force a recall. And the media loves this. They think, well, just wait, this is good. And the average Canadian, they hear that. Well, of course, we want, if a product is dangerous, for Health Canada to be able to force a recall. So I need to talk about this a little bit, because I hope you can appreciate right now, Health Canada can't force a recall just by saying recall. They can't actually force a recall, they just have to go to court and ask for it. So right now, if Health Canada asks a pharmaceutical drug company, well, we need you to recall a product, do you know what the pharmaceutical drug company does? They recall it. Do you know why? Because if a pharmaceutical drug company left a product on the market after Health Canada said recall and people started to get hurt and die, they would be slaughtered in court. There would be a class action lawsuit and they would be slaughtered. I mean, they don't hold back. The regulator says jump on something like recall, they say how high. But you know what? Some natural health product manufacturers defy Health Canada. So I've told you about the example of True Hope. Health Canada told True Hope, recall, no, well, not recall, but take it off the market. The same thing. If they had been selling it to stores, they would have said recall, and True Hope would have said no, people will die. I've asked a client, Wild Vineyard, if I can use them as an example, and they said yes. Because when manufacturers come to me, because Health Canada's asked them to do a recall, we kind of have this set process that now I go through. And the first thing I do is I confirm that they've stopped selling the product. Okay, so in Wild Vineyard's case, what happened is Health Canada said to them, listen, we've analyzed 4 of your products, we've found unacceptably high levels of arsenic, we want you to recall the products. And Wild Vineyard just automatically, not a lot of stores carry these products, but they told the store stop selling. And pretty well every manufacturer of natural health products will do that. If Health Canada says there's a risk, they'll automatically stop selling. But you have to understand, if they agreed and start a recall process, a bunch of legal obligations fall into place, and some bad things can follow, and it tends to be irreversible, so you want to confirm whether or not Health Canada is correct. So you want to make sure that you're not creating a health risk, so you stop selling. And then we asked Health Canada, well, will you give us the lab results? And Health Canada wouldn't, and they never do, so I wasn't really surprised. So I asked a leading food scientist, I said, okay, here's our problem. What lab should I use? Give me the best lab in Canada to get to the bottom of this. And I sent it to the lab, because there's only a couple of labs in Canada that can analyze a natural health product and tell us how much arsenic is organic and how much arsenic in a product is inorganic. And this is really important because organic arsenic is perfectly safe. You can even go on the Health Canada website and in their search feature, type in arsenic, and documents will pop up and they'll say, we don't have a problem with organic arsenic, it's safe. Our problem is with inorganic arsenic. So this lab gets back to us and it says, well, there's arsenic in it, but we can't find any inorganic arsenic. So if it's there, it's below the level that our instruments will measure, which is incredibly fine. So really, what the lab told us is Health Canada was wrong. Yes, there was arsenic, but there wasn't a health risk because the arsenic was all organic. So the next thing I do in a case like that, where we learn that Health Canada's risk analysis is wrong, which I can tell you has occurred every single time except for once, and that once, neither lab, Health Canada or ours, could determine the real truth, so neither of us know. But in every time where the lab's been able to figure it out, or food scientists have been able to figure it out, I've never had a case where they've been right. I've just had one case where we couldn't figure it out. But then we move on to the step, and I say, okay, Health Canada's telling you to recall. We know their reason is wrong, but you have to understand, because I have to give them legal advice, I say, you have to understand, if you don't recall, even though they're wrong, they're going to hurt you. They're going to charge you. It's going to cost you a lot of money paying me, and you're going to get fined, and they're going to publish advisories along the way and hurt your business. They're going to hurt you. But you also have to understand, I need to know from you, do any of your customers depend on your product for their health? Because if some of your customers are depending on your product for their health, you can be liable under the criminal code for criminal negligence if you withdraw the products. And this is, no, but listen, this is very sensible. We have learned the hard way that we do not want people to be providing a tangible health benefit and then withdraw it in such a way that people can't transition to other treatments where they will suffer or die. And so you can be criminally negligent under the criminal code if you do that. And I have an obligation to advise my clients of what their legal situation is. I mean, they're coming to me for legal advice. And in a situation like Wild Vineyards, in their case, people did rely on those products, and it wasn't obvious to us that we could transition them to other products. So they didn't initiate a recall. They did what I would call the morally correct thing. Now, Health Canada and the Minister of Health would describe them as a rogue company. They would describe True Hope as a rogue company. I would not. I would describe them, both those companies, as ethical, responsible manufacturers, doing what we would want them to do. But now if Bill C-51 passes with its enforcement powers, I would have to tell a company like Wild Vineyard, well, you'll be criminally negligent if you withdraw the product off the market, and you're going to hurt people. But know this, if you do not withdraw your product from as Health Canada is demanding, if you do not hurt people, Health Canada will utterly destroy you. They will bankrupt you personally, they will destroy and bankrupt your company, and all of your products will be off the market because you will not withstand their attack. I'm going to if Bill C-51 passes, that's going to become my standard legal advice to a company in that situation. So when the media and Health Canada says this recall provision is good, you have to consider the few companies that actually defy Health Canada. Now, you also have to understand that if Health Canada actually wanted Wild Vineyard to recall, they can still go to federal court and ask the federal court for an injunction preventing Wild Vineyard from selling the product. But the problem is then they'd have to give the federal court evidence of harm and sit there while we presented our evidence that it wasn't harmful. So in the Wild Vineyard case, they didn't do that. But you have to understand that that power is there right now. Bill C-51 makes it an offense to not listen to a direction from an enforcement officer. And what astounds me about that, because sometimes in legislation there is a provision, look at if a police officer tells you to do something and you don't do it, it can be an offense. So even under a criminal code, if certain conditions exist and a police officer tells you to blow into a breathalyzer and you don't, it's actually an offense not to blow. Like sometimes we do that. But here we have an act that is regulating health products. And it gives inspectors the power to say, do this or don't do that, and it's an offense. So an inspector could walk up to a homeopathic doctor and say, I want you to stop providing this substance to your patients. That doctor could have hundreds of people relying on that substance, but the untrained inspector, who's not qualified to be making a health decision, who in his or her mind is actually making an enforcement decision, but is actually making a decision affecting people's health. The inspector walks up to a company and says, I want you to stop selling products that people are choosing to access for their health. You have to understand it's a health decision. And I have a personal problem with untrained police officers. Basically, they're called inspectors, but they're Health Canada's police officers. I have a problem with them making health decisions. I don't have a problem with them going to a court and saying, look, we've got this conflict, the Act and regulations say this, and we would like them to stop, and having an independent court deciding the safety issues. I don't have a problem with that, which is what we have now, but I really do have a problem with, inspectors basically telling natural health manufacturers or natural health practitioners what they should or shouldn't do. In my mind, that creates a dangerous precedent, and it's not something that we needed. Bill C-51 abolishes the law of trespass. So and I was asking you earlier about are we free and talking about how we've been conditioned. I kind of made a mockery of the Soviet Union because here we had the law of trespass to protect our private property rights. Bill C-51, it actually says that you cannot go after the inspectors if they trespass on your property. And there's no limit. They can be on your property to look at your neighbor. They don't have to be on there even to be searching your place. You have no recourse. It's amazing. Like, why would we do that? Or is there such a safety risk that we need to give up a right that we've cherished for centuries in the British common law system? I don't think so. It's amazing. They can now seize private property, and they don't even have to have a reason. And the bizarre thing about this is, under the Act as it currently is, they can seize private property, or so the Act says, if they believe it's connected with an offense. Okay? That section, as it currently exists, has been declared unconstitutional. So the federal court in 1987 looked at that and said, no, that is unconstitutional. Because under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we have the right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. And our courts tell us that if the state is wanting to gather evidence to prosecute us, that they have to go to an independent person, such as a judge or a justice of the peace, so we're talking the courts. They have to apply for a warrant, and the person issuing the warrant can only issue it on an objective standard. It can't just be a gut feeling, a subjective thing. And that's the minimum protection that we cherish as citizens to protect us against unreasonable search and seizure. Well, why do we have to give that up? So when the courts have told us, that's the bare minimum, like, what's wrong with Health Canada applying for a warrant if they want to seize your property? Do you know they don't even have to go to court? The Government of Canada has made it so easy that they have justices of the peace that answer the telephone. You can phone in. It's called a telewarrant. You can phone in and say, yeah, I'm outside of ABC Health Store, and they've got natural occurring vitamin C. Like, people are going to die, and you need to issue a warrant. I need to seize that stuff. But my point is, when I say, they have to apply for a search warrant, I don't want you to think this is onerous. Like, the police do it every day, day in, day out, because we require the police to use rule of law. Why can't we require Health Canada to use rule of law? We do now, but under Bill C-51 we don't. Are we so unsafe that we have to give them basically police state powers? Now, if they seize our property under a warrant, courts are very concerned about the state taking property. Think about historically. The king used to just come to the village and take what he wanted. And after a while, us country bumpkins, we thought, we kind of don't like this. And we rebelled and we established courts and rule of law, which really was to protect both our lives and our property. And so courts very jealously guard this. If the state seizes your property under a warrant, the state has to right away give the court an outline. Here's what we seized. Here's why we seized it. And ask for permission to hold it. And the way our law is written, they can hold it for 30 days for a maximum before they have to come back and ask for permission again. And they can do that a couple of times, and then a court will get fed up and say, no, that's it. Give it back unless you do something. So if the state started criminal proceedings against you, the court will say, okay, you can hold it until that's done. Or if the state was applying to keep your property, then the court would say, okay, you can wait till that's done. But the point is the courts have said, the state can't just come and seize your property and then not do anything. They can only seize it for a purpose, and then they better get down to that purpose, because you can't just take people's property. But under Bill C-51, not only do they not need a reason, there's no limit. There's no requirement that they report to a court. And to add insult to injury, and I've never seen this before, they can send you a bill. They can invoice you for the cost of coming and seizing your property and of storing it. That is amazing, isn't it? Like, what are we doing? So, I've never seen anything like it. And the Bill C-52, the Consumer Protection Act, it has the same provisions. This right to search and seize. It's actually a little worse, though. And I'm not here to talk about Bill C-52, but this is absolutely amazing. Bill C-51 also allows, basically the government can adopt foreign laws, foreign treaties, agreements made by foreign bodies as regulation. So like, let's say a whole bunch of countries got together and came up with a treaty. If it's something of importance to Canadian citizens, often it will be debated in Parliament. It doesn't have to be, but often it will. But Bill C-51 allows them to just pass a regulation saying, oh, okay, Germany's law is now Canadian law. And what strikes me as funny is they actually don't have to put that in Bill C-51. Like, as terrible as that sounds, they can do that anyway. But, at least I think they can do it anyway. But they're putting it in there, so they must have something in the back of their minds that they want to do. And that's troubling to me. Now, I'm going to kind of wrap up here. The natural health community, though, is being positioned for a takedown. And Bill C-51 needs to be stopped. Okay, and I need to be clear here. It needs to be stopped. It doesn't need to be amended. It needs to be stopped. And Bill C-51 is such a threat to your freedom to choose to access natural health products that we cannot afford to send a mixed message. I mean, aside from the fact that really there's nothing in there that helps us at all, if you were to write to your MP and say, well, we want it amended, is that signaling that you like most of it? Do you just like some of it? Do you like half of it? Like, what kind of a message does that send? It's a real mixed message. And my point is this bill is such a threat that you cannot have your MP have any ambiguity in his or her mind. They have to know. They have to just think about it, because first of all, there's impetus in the government to pass the bill. And the only thing that's going to stop that is immense political pressure. And if you're writing, let's say you're an MP and somebody writes to you, well, amend Bill C-51, what does that mean? Are you for it or are you against it? Or are you both for and against it? Like, we don't have the luxury here, so we need to stop this bill, and you need to take action to protect your freedom of choice. Okay? I've tried to drive it home to you tonight that what's happening here is absolutely perverse, and your actions are actually going to affect your health, your freedom to choose for both you and your family. So what to do? I think first and foremost, and I hope you listen to me and take action, I'm going to ask you to do basically three things. First of all, I want you to join and support the Health Action Network Society, HANS, that put on this event. Because HANS, yes, give HANS a hand, please. HANS has been instrumental in spearheading informational campaigns so that Canadians know what's going on, what the effects of things like Bill C-51 are. They've been instrumental in the fight in the 90s. It is incredible the influence that HANS has had. And you have to know that that doesn't happen in a vacuum. They've got staff. They've got, to rent venues. They need to send out materials. They need to publish things. They need to spend the time researching. It just simply doesn't happen in a vacuum. And without a group like HANS, people will not be getting the message. So, I'm not kidding. You need to, if you're not a HANS member, you need to join. And if you are a HANS member, you need to support them financially over and above just the nominal membership fee, because this is important. And you're here because of the efforts that HANS and Common Ground has undertaken to get you here. The next thing I'd like you to do is to join and support the Natural Health Products Protection Association, which is the organization that I'm a part of. And where we differ from HANS is HANS is a charity. And we have incorporated as a nonprofit organization so that we can aggressively lobby in Ottawa, which charities are restricted. So we can take some actions that charities can't take as a nonprofit organization, and we will be aggressively active in Ottawa, and we have been instrumental in analyzing and educating about Bill C-51 and basically bringing it to attention by speaking and being involved in the media. And that also does not happen in a vacuum. So if you don't support groups like HANDS, if you don't support groups like the Natural Health Protection Association, this doesn't happen. And in a minute, I'm going to ask Peter Helgason to just come up quickly and plug the NHPPA. I also actually am urging you to take personal action by writing at least 3 letters. And HANDS has provided for you material to actually write letters tonight, and they're going to take the time to let you do that. But you need to write a letter to your MP, you need to write a letter to the Prime Minister, and you need to write a letter to the Minister of Health, at least 3 letters. You can write more. And you make it clear to them you will not vote for any MP that supports Bill C-51, because that is their button, is voting. And you have to know the MPs are now very alive to this issue because people have been writing letters, people have been phoning them, people have been emailing. But personal letters they pay very much attention to. But we still need to keep up the pressure if we're actually going to win this fight, and it's instrumental that we do. So I'm just going to ask Peter to come up very quickly and plug the NHPPA. If you can make your way up here, Peter. And then I'll finish.
I think it's a property rights issue, and the property in question is actually your body. And so while our foods may not be drugs, is an argument that we've fought over 10 or 15 years and haven't had a great deal of success. I know absolutely for certain my body is mine, and the NHPPA has no formal position on what or how you choose to treat yourself, but we are uncompromisingly dedicated to allowing you to continue to exercise your free choice on your most basic personal decisions, on your most basic property, which is your body. I think that clearly we've demonstrated leadership and tenacity in fighting on this file, and if you were to ask my wife, I think she would probably let you think that I've probably gone a little over the top on time. But we do need your financial support, and the only way we can travel, the only way we can arrange publicity for speaking tours, notwithstanding the great support of organizations like HANDS, is to buy time, to buy space. And this is a fundamental message. If you read The Sun today, if you read The Province today, if you watch Global National, if you watch the CBC, it's our libertinian former Minister of Foreign Affairs that's getting all the news, while there's a fundamental issue that is completely consuming 308 members of Parliament's offices and staffs right now. I'm talking tens of thousands of communications on a daily basis. We can't get a blip. Andrew Coyne is in town today covering the Canadian Human Rights Commission stuff. I sent him an email and asked him to come. Are you here, Andrew? I'll buy you a beer. We're getting nothing. So we need your financial support. Lorna has graciously provided HANDS's reproduction facilities, no pun intended, and we have envelopes at the front with support and pledge forms. As Shawn said, it's very important to support HANDS, but what we need more than money is the moral authority to communicate with you on a consensual basis. We need your email addresses, we need your addresses. We want to be able to send messages that you want, and we want you to forward those messages to your friends and your folks on your email lists. And we're not going to roll down. We're not going to lay down. We're not going to roll over. I have 3 little kids. I got a 15-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. I've got a grandfather who fought in the First World War to fight against this kind of regulation that our government is imposing. I have a father who spent 2.5 years in the North Atlantic in the Second World War. And I've got a brother who was a career Canadian military guy and still works in the military bureaucracy. I come from a family that believes in this country. I come from a family that believes in sacrifice. And I think that nothing is more important than remembering who we are and what our relationship with those who purport to govern us is. We are not servants. We are masters. We ask government to do our will, to do our bidding, and we're asking continuously for 10 years and we're being denied. And I would ask you to please support us, the NHPPA, and to please continue to support HANDS. And I thank you very much.